to you. Uh, do we know for a fact that there's no electricity right now? Because I know this microphone is working somehow. Okay. Okay. So the lights will come on when they come on. Okay. Thank you, Vikram. All right. Let's get started. Day number 2. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jata Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome back, everybody that was here yesterday, and welcome to all the people that are here for the first time. Very happy to be here with you. Hello in the back. Maybe I'll just do a super quick summary of some of the things that we discussed yesterday, and then we'll keep it going. Yesterday, we used an analogy. We used two important analogies we used coming from the yogis that have wandered these hills since before we can even remember. One of them was of the musk deer. Does anyone remember what the analogy of the musk deer illustrated? I'm going to be turning to all of you to get a little more interaction today. Anyone remember that analogy, the musk deer? Yeah, the musk deer has this scent within itself. And how does that relate to us? That's right. Yeah, the musk deer is searching for this. It's searching for this scent. It's running all over. It's becoming exhausted. It's collapsing, falling on the ground, searching for the scent, not realizing all along the scent was inside its own self, that aroma of musk. And similarly, the yogis are saying we're searching for happiness. We're looking here, we're looking there, we're running all over, we're becoming exhausted, we're collapsing, not realizing that happiness is inside us. It's our nature. It's not anything that we need to achieve from outside, attain from outside. It's something that we simply need to uncover from within. This was the point the yogis wanted to help us understand. In a sense, they're saying that so many of us, maybe most of us, practically all of us, are living a life based on a false presumption that we can find happiness through some kind of external source, that I need some external source to find happiness. When I get this job, when I meet the right person, when I get a raise, when I move from here to there, whatever it may be, it's not dependent on that, they're saying. It's within, you need just to uncover it. Okay, and then the next logical question would be, well, if happiness is within me, and if that's my nature, and if my nature is unchangeable, as it's said about the soul or the Atma, then why am I not feeling that happiness all the time? How did I lose touch with my own true nature? And the answer to that one was that actually it's not that we lose anything. We may say it that way, like we may use that kind of language, I lost touch. But when it comes to our own nature, you can't lose it. It's always there. It's just covered up. But how do we, in a sense, lose touch with it? The example of, who remembers? Anyone remember the analogy? The moon, yes. That's right. The moon is shining steadily in the sky. It's not like the clouds that are blowing all around. It's not like the leaves that are flittering in the wind. The moon shines its light steady. You can picture a full moon. If you look at it, you're going to see it's steady. But if we make the mistake and believe that the reflection of the moon on the water, let's say on the river, if we think that reflection of the moon on the river is the moon, then we'll see that the moon has taken on the characteristics of the water, which is that it's rippling, right? And we'll say, oh, the moon ripples, the moon shakes like this. No, the moon doesn't shake. The moon is always steady. Similarly, our nature is steady. Our blissful nature is something that's steady. It's not going anywhere. We can't lose it. It's there. But if we identify or misidentify the mind as being the self, right? Or we could say the reflection of the self on the mind, well, then we'll believe that our self has taken on the characteristics of the mind, which is made out of material energy and is always moving, always flickering. And that's where we want to begin today. We want to talk about the two different kind of energies. Let's start here, okay? Everybody ready? And please feel free, our time is, in one sense, 15 minutes is a little short for this kind of talk, but it's suitable, particularly because we're doing it every day. But I would be very happy to take questions at any point. If people have thoughts or questions, if I'm using any terms that you don't understand, or if for some reason you're not feeling the message connecting, then please feel free to raise your hand. And as long as I feel that the questions may not divert me too far if I'm trying to reach, we'll try to reach by the end of the class. I'd be very happy to take it. And if not, we can always discuss those things outside the class. Is that okay? Everybody ready to ask questions? Okay, nobody's too shy, right? Okay, so let's talk about if we're saying, I want to share one thing that we also said yesterday. We defined yoga in a particular way in relation to what we just discussed. I don't think anybody memorized it, right? Okay, so we're going to try again. I don't have my board here. When I write it down on the board tomorrow, I think I'll have a whiteboard here, and then I can write these things down. But see if you can see, even if you don't memorize it word for word, if the concept. There are three elements to this definition of yoga. See if it sinks in. Some people are writing down, I see. Very good. Yoga is a practice. That's the first element, the practice, which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind. That's the second element. For the purpose of the self experiencing their own true nature. That's the third element, the nature of the self, right? So yoga is a practice which empowers one to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of the self experiencing their own true nature. This is yoga. If whatever it is that we're talking about, if someone says my golf game is my yoga, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? Is it a practice that's empowering you to overcome the obstacle of the mind for the purpose of experiencing your own true nature? If it really does that, then it's yoga. And if it doesn't do that, maybe it's your way of relaxing, but it's not yoga. Okay. So if we have this nature, this eternal nature, we're going to talk about that more. First, we're going to discuss the nature of the self. Then we're going to discuss the mind. Then we're going to discuss the practices. And when we're done with that, we're going to go deeper into the real deep secrets of yoga. Okay. There are these Krishna says that there's the most confidential teachings of the Vedic literature. That's where we're going to go after that. I would call the first three subjects, I would call it like, what's the word I'd like to use for that? Conventional Vedanta. And then there's confidential Vedanta, which involves devotion, or involves love. So we'll get there. Okay, so we're beginning with these teachings that are teaching us that we have this nature, this eternal nature. Let's get into that. If the different sciences or different philosophers, they approach looking at this world in different ways. Like scientists will take the ingredients of this world and break it down into I believe they call it an elementary chart, correct? Is that right? Elementary, is that the right word? Yeah, elementary. They're going to break it down into how many elements there are, how many elements they've discovered. How many elements have they discovered? Anyone know the latest? Is it 200 and something? I'm sorry?
Some are man-made.
Oh,
All are natural.
oh, yeah, but the natural elements that they find, I don't know, there's several hundred, right? They break it down like this. The yogis look at this universe, and the first thing they do is divide it in two. They say there are two types of energy. This is groundbreaking. I mean, in one sense, it's not groundbreaking because it's always been there. But even in the world of modern science, this is something worth investigating because it's going right to the questions that science struggles with right now, particularly what is consciousness, right? This is the one that they cannot answer, right? With all their experiments and all their microscopes and all of their telescopes and all their equipment. Consciousness remains a mystery. It's something that they're unable to create in a laboratory, anything conscious. So the yogis will take the energy of this universe and divide it into two categories. And they'll use different Sanskrit terms for that. Sometimes they'll say Purusha and Prakriti. Right? Purusha and Prakriti. And those are both big words with many meanings, but we're going to keep it simple for today's talk. Referring to the same two energies, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna will say Prakriti and Param Prakriti, or Apara Prakriti and Prakriti, right? Para Prakriti and Apara Prakriti, that there's a superior nature and an inferior nature, or a superior energy and an inferior energy. So let's discuss those two energies. We could say in English, most simply, spiritual energy and material energy, right? Or spirit and matter. The yogi is going to say that everything that we experience within this realm of this universe is composed of one of these two energies. That's the first fundamental. Then you could take those energies and begin to divide them into further categories. But first, it's essential to understand these two energies, the material energy and the spiritual energy. If we understand these two energies, it tells us so much about ourselves. We'll understand so much about ourselves, right? What we are, what we are not. Okay? So let's, for the sake of our conversation right now, let's stick with the terms Purusha and Prakriti, right? And commonly Prakriti will be translated as nature, or let's say the material nature, the material energy. And Purusha, very fascinating word with a lot of meaning, but we can say it means person or spiritual energy, right? A person. What's the difference between these two energies? Fundamentally, there are two very important distinctions between the material energy, which is the Prakriti, and the spiritual energy, Purusha. Shall we discuss that? Anyone have any ideas? Can give me one big difference? Yes, Alejandro.
Permanent and impermanent.
That's very good. Yes, exactly. It is said in these ancient texts and by the great sages that the material energy is temporary and the spiritual energy is eternal. Or in one sense, both are eternal, but the forms that the material energy takes are temporary, right? The energy itself is eternal. It's always there, but it's in a constant state of flux. If something is made of material energy, it's shifting, even if it's shifting so slow that we can't see it, but it's in a state of flux. It's here one day, and you come back later, and it's changed. That's material energy. Anything material is like that. This building, right? I don't know when it was built, but I assume if we came here 100 years ago, it wasn't standing here, right? And if we come back 100 years from now, it may or may not be standing here. But if we come back 1,000 years, I feel pretty confident it won't be here. What to speak of 10,000 years? The element of time will change it, right? There's a force. When the yogis speak of time, they don't mean it just like the measurements that we use, the seconds and minutes and hours and days, etc. When they speak of time, kala, they're speaking of a force, a power. And it's a power that shifts material energy, moves material energy, changes material energy, ultimately destroys the forms that material energy has taken, and then reforms them again into new forms. Right? So that includes, again, this building. That includes, really importantly, our own bodies. The yogis understand that this body is made out of material energy. Right? And whereas spiritual energy is something that never changes, something that you can't alter, something that is irreducible. You can't find the parts in spiritual energy and then break it apart and then put it back together in a new shape. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that's actually where he begins his teachings in Bhagavad Gita, practically by saying that the soul, the Atma, which is composed of spiritual energy, you can't cut it in half. You can't burn it, right? You can't break it. It's eternal. So this is the first distinction. One is eternal, one is temporary. And then the second distinction, yes?
Purusha is just a witnesser and witnesser.
Okay, a witnesser.
And Prakriti is more like into action. She can actually create, but Purusha, he's always still.
Well, this is great. Again, these two words have very broad meanings, and so what you're saying is very true. But I'm using the terms in a tighter context. But yeah, in one sense, the Purusha is the witnesser, right? We were speaking yesterday that Patanjali, when he's speaking of the Purusha or the Atma in the Yoga Sutras, he used the term drista, the seer. Right, the seer, you're saying the witnesser, the one that experiences and that observes. That means there's a conscious experiencer, right? Conscious. So really one energy is conscious and the other energy is the witnessed, right? It is the unconscious energy. If you came and if someone snuck up behind me right now and they just touched my little toe, I could feel it because my own consciousness is penetrating my entire body, right? Whereas if someone went and touched a rock, there's no experiencer in there, or some ordinary, there are plastic chairs in the back. There's no consciousness within that energy, right? It's inert, you could say. So spirit is conscious. It experiences. It has feelings. Whereas matter has no consciousness in it. These are the two fundamental differences between material energy and spiritual energy. The yogis are saying that we are composed of spiritual energy. Now, there's different. We actually live at a time. If we would have spoken 30 years ago, 50 years ago, the scientific, the general scientific consensus was that consciousness is something that's generated through matter. That if you can combine the material energy in certain ways, consciousness will emerge. Nowadays, it may still be the most popular amongst scientists, but actually it's being challenged because as the days go by, I just heard recently that I wish I took note of their names, but two important scientists, it said that 25 years ago, they made a bet. I think they bet something like a case of champagne or something like that. One said, within 25 years, we'll be able to create consciousness. We'll be able to explain it all. And we'll be able to actually, and the other one said, I don't think you'll be able to do that. And just recently, the 25 years passed, and the one had to admit, we don't know anything. Like we are still completely baffled by what is consciousness. I recently saw a YouTube clip of a very popular scientist. When I say popular scientist, I mean the kind of scientists that are always on television speaking about science. And he was speaking with conviction that consciousness is a material construct. And he started giving his explanations why. And he said, well, at a certain point, X-rays were developed. And we took X-rays of people just before they died and just after they died, and there was no difference in the X-ray. And when I hear this kind of thing, I'm saying, yeah, you have to think a little bit deeper than that. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is going to say that the soul, which is composed of spiritual energy, is avyaktam. It's invisible. You're not going to see it with your eyes. It's a different type of energy, right? The material senses can perceive material energy, and a lot of material energy we can't even perceive with our senses. There are radio waves flowing through this room right now. Do any of us see them? No, we don't see them. Doesn't mean that they're not there. You have to investigate on another level. Okay, so the yogis are saying that we are spirit. What are we? That within this body, within the region of the heart of the body, there's a spark of spiritual energy, a spark of eternal conscious energy. That is us. That's me. Right? Within my body, there's a little spark. And in the Bhagavad Gita will say that just as the sun illuminates the universe with its light, penetrates the universe, in the same way, within a living body, there's a spark of spiritual energy called the soul, called the Atma, called the self. And it's spreading its rays throughout the body, spreading its rays of consciousness. They say that within this region, the area of the heart, and within this area of the body, sometimes they call it the cave of the heart. The Upanishads refer to it as a cave, the cave of the heart. That this spark of energy exists. And that when the blood passes through that area of the body, that it mystically, something science can't explain, that it gathers energy from the self, from the Atma, from that spark of spiritual energy. And through the blood, consciousness is transferred. So wherever we find blood flowing in the body, we find consciousness. Right? Again, if someone came up and just touched my little toe, because my blood is flowing there, then my consciousness flows there and I can feel it. I can sense it. I can experience it. Right? But in my toenail, I can't feel anything. Right? In my hair, I can't feel. Where the blood doesn't flow, there's no... You can come and clip the toenails, no problem. You clip the toe, it'll be very painful, right? Or if you took a tourniquet, if you right, let's say below the knee, you took a rope and tied it very tight and restricted the flow of blood, then what happens to the lower leg and to the toes? They become numb, they become dull, the awareness goes, right? The consciousness goes from that area. Now if you touch my toe, I wouldn't feel it. Even if you took a pin, you stick a pin in my toe, I won't feel it. Right? My consciousness isn't flowing there. So the yogis are saying that throughout our bodies, the consciousness is flowing through the blood, but where's the source of that consciousness? Consciousness is a symptom of the eternal soul, that spark of spiritual energy within. That's who we are, the yogis are saying. What is the nature of that soul? It's the nature of the spiritual energy. Eternality, consciousness. And then the yogis had one more. They had one more inherent characteristic to the self. Eternality, we call that sat. Consciousness, we call chit. And the third one, ananda, bliss. Right? That the nature of the soul is that it's blissful. It has a happiness. There's a lot to say about these three. Maybe just very briefly, we can say that eternality, right? Okay, that we exist eternally, right? If we experience that eternality, if we practice yoga, overcome the obstacle of the mind, and experience our own true nature, we will sense our own eternality. In a sense, it's like having a very zoomed out perspective. Normally, our perspective is a very tight little spot in time. We grant that little spot in time a lot of importance. I'm going through this right now. It's so hard. If we were able to zoom out with a sense of our own eternality, the things that seem so big and important in our life right now would seem so less important, right? If we saw them as just a blip, right, in a line of eternality. Right? This is how the yogis see. That zoomed out perspective gives them the ability to move through this world very gracefully, because the things that shake us up, the things that disturb us, the things that cause us pain and suffering and confusion, from the very zoomed out perspective, you're floating above it, right? And you can have that perspective even as you move through this world, not be shaken by anything. Actually, maybe there's something I can read from Bhagavad Gita. You'd like to hear some Bhagavad Gita? This is from chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. And here, I mentioned yesterday that I felt that it is my conviction that the states of awareness that are described in texts like Bhagavad Gita and the Puranas and the Itihasas like the Mahabharata, we hear about great yogis who achieved these great states of awareness, these great states of consciousness. We may feel, maybe in a previous age they were able to do that, or I don't think I could ever do that. My conviction is everybody in this room right now, we could do this in this life. We just have to make it our priority, and we need to have a suitable practice, right? In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 6th chapter, Krishna spells out the path of Ashtanga Yoga for Arjuna. And when Arjuna hears the whole thing, he says, I don't think I can do that. says, because the mind is more difficult to control than the wind. So what to do now? And Krishna says, it's okay. You just need a suitable practice and detachment, and you can achieve these goals. And then he goes on to outline. But here, this is also from the 6th chapter, where Krishna is describing the experience of the yogi, the experience of the advanced yogi, the experience that we could all achieve in this life. And I know people, and maybe I'll tell some stories, maybe even today, let's see, of people that have achieved this kind of state of awareness. Okay, are you ready? Everybody eager? Are you on the edge of your seat? Okay, just checking, because this is important, life-changing stuff. We could all be like this. This is texts 20 through 23 of chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita. In the stage of perfection called trance or samadhi, one's mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by the practice of yoga. Now listen to this carefully. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind, right? A mind that's not programmed with all kinds of false information. When we're talking about the nature of the self right now, and when we've completed this, we're going to discuss the mind. But when we discuss the mind, we're going to use another analogy. And that analogy is a modern analogy. And that is a computer, right? Computer technology provides us incredibly strong analogies to understanding the self and the mind and the body and so on. And really, when we look at the mind, essentially what it is a computer. It stores information. It stores data. It stores information. It processes information. It has applications on it that are very similar to the kind of applications that we find on a computer. So when it says here, to see the self by the pure mind, it means that we don't have a mind that's programmed with all kind of false understandings, misunderstandings about who I am, what this world is, what divinity is. Right? When we have a mind that's not falsely programmed, we can understand the self. We can feel the self. So again, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, this perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Now listen to this. Established thus, one never departs from the truth. And upon gaining this, one thinks there is no greater gain. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of the greatest difficulty. Okay, so that's the kind of state of awareness that a yogi can achieve, right? No matter what's going on. I'll go ahead and I'll tell the story. I'd like to hear the story. A person that I know, that I knew, right? His name was Bhakti Tirtha Swami. Fascinating man, right? Fascinating. African-American, grew up in Cleveland. For those that are not from America, Cleveland is like a rough town. It's not when you visit America, you don't go to Cleveland generally. Kind of an industrial town, kind of many of its neighborhoods are dangerous neighborhoods, and he grew up in the ghettos of Cleveland. But as a boy, he worked hard in school, and he got a scholarship to Princeton University, which is one of the most prestigious Ivy League schools in the United States. And when he was in the university, he became exposed to all different types of thinking, all different types of ideas. He became a Black Panther when he was there. Do you know Black Panther? Which was like, kind of like a militant civil rights organization back in the 60s, especially. And then he kind of evolved through that into spiritual life. And he got very interested in Vedanta and eventually in Bhakti. And when he got into Bhakti Yoga, he became a brahmachari or a monk, and eventually sannyasi. And he was a beautiful man, actually very handsome. Like his body was like athletic, and he was kind of just had a beautiful energy about him. He was very devoted and very serious about his spiritual practice. And actually he became very courageous too. Like one of the services that he did, one of his sevas, was that he used to smuggle books like Bhagavad Gita into communist countries back before the fall of the Iron Curtain, and which was like a risky thing to do. There's a risk. If you got caught, you could be imprisoned in a labor camp indefinitely. And particularly for an African-American man, he would be like the only black person in the entire country practically, so he used to do that. And but he was just, through the steadiness of his practice and the genuine devotion and the blessings that he attained in life, his spiritual understanding became deeper and deeper and deeper. He became a guru. He had many followers, many students, including famous people like Nelson Mandela. He used to do huge programs in South Africa with Nelson Mandela, people like Muhammad Ali, and so many other people. And you used to see him, he would give fascinating classes with so much spiritual conviction, and he used to dance and kirtan. So just beautiful to see. And then one day he got a diagnosis that he had cancer. He had cancer in his foot. And the doctor said, this is a very aggressive form of cancer. If you want to survive, we recommend that immediately we need to amputate your foot. And he said, well, this body doesn't belong to me, right? My body belongs to Krishna, my body belongs to God, my body belongs to divinity. If in order for me to continue to serve in this body, you need to take the foot, then take the foot. So they amputated the foot. Now nobody likes to go through that kind of thing, obviously. Painful, traumatic. For him, it wasn't traumatic. Okay, if this is the necessity, then go ahead and do it. This body is not me. But shortly after that, they found that the cancer had spread through his leg. They said, we need to amputate the leg. He said, okay, amputate the leg. They took the leg away. He's still fine. Then they found that actually it had spread throughout his entire body. It was very aggressive. He could go through all kinds of treatments to try to prolong his life. But it was at that stage where there was no turning back, ultimately. So he said, this is okay. He said, with this body, I've tried to show my students how to live a life devoted to God. And now I'll use the same body to show them how to die in a state of devotion to God. So he went to one farm that was kind of like a bhakti yoga farm in the United States. And he said, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to do my devotional practices, and anybody that wants to stay here with me can stay. And so he stayed at that farm. And he just engaged especially in these two bhakti practices. Hearing, we call shravanam, and chanting, we call kirtanam. Hearing and chanting, shravanam, kirtanam. He would chant on his beads, chanting Maha Mantra on his japamala, and also in kirtan. And he would read from these sacred texts and discuss them with others. And then another person came to visit him at that. I saw him at that time, and it was, for me, it was kind of a bit heart-wrenching to see him in that condition. As I say, he was always beautiful and dynamic and just had such a special energy about him, and now his body was withering away. His leg was missing, his body was withering away. He was in great pain because this very aggressive form of cancer was spread throughout his body, and he wasn't taking the types of painkillers that people would normally take because he wanted to keep his awareness very clear. So it was hard for me to see him like that, but he was fine. He was as happy as ever. He had a big smile on his face. And one of my real mentors in life, one of my gurus in life, some of you may have heard of him. I believe they may be selling his book out here, The Journey Home. But Radhanath Swami, they were very close friends. And when Radhanath Swami visited him, Bhakti Tirtha Swami said to him, can I ask a favor of you? And Radhanath Swami's response was like, of course, you can ask me anything. And he said, can you stay here with me until I die? I want to die in your arms, he said. I want to die in your arms. Meaning that he had so much love and respect for this person and felt that this person was so divinely connected that I want to be right with you. I want your support and your presence in my life right at that most essential moment, the final test in life. I want you to be right there with me. And Radhanath Swami responded, of course I'll stay with you. So at that time, they believed he had at most 3 days left to live. But it turned out that he had 8 weeks. He lived 8 more weeks, and Radhanath Swami stayed there with him those 8 weeks. And what were they doing that time? They were just same practices, same thing that they had always done. hearing and chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, discussing that, opening their hearts to one another, sharing their thoughts and their feelings. And this is what Radha Swami said, that I believe it was the day before he passed away. At this point, he's very emaciated. And he said the two of them were sitting together and they were chanting Mahamantra on their Japamala. And he said at one point, Bhakti Tirtha Swami turned to him and he said, first thing was, he had never seen a smile like this on a person's face. He said he had seen big smiles before, bright smiles before, but he had never seen a smile like this. He had some kind of very radiant, huge smile on his face. And he said he was crying, but it wasn't just like normal crying, but it was like water was gushing out of his eyes and pouring down his face. And he said this. Now you have to think of his condition. He has no leg. His body's racked with cancer and emaciated. He's in a state of total pain, and he's about to be ripped out of his body and thrown into the dark unknown. But he had this smile on his face, and tears are pouring out of his eyes, and he looked at Radha Swami, and he smiled, and he said, Radha Swami, life just doesn't get any better than this. Right? Like, when most people would be saying, life just doesn't get any worse than this. He was saying, life just doesn't get any better than this. He was feeling something. He was experiencing something. Something that made him capable of transcending all of these problematic material circumstances. Right? We go back to Bhagavad Gita. What does it say? This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. Nothing else was there to relish and rejoice in, right? There's no physical comforts that he was experiencing, no physical sensory, sensual kind of satisfaction or pleasures that that this happiness was coming from, right? It was all coming from within. From the nature of the self, situated in his constitutional spiritual position. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth. He's not thinking, I am this body, I'm a material construct that's about to fall apart and disintegrate. He was realizing, I'm beyond this body, right? One never departs from the truth. Established thus, one never departs from the truth. And gaining this, he thinks there's no greater gain. Right? Life just doesn't get any better than this. Right? There's nothing that I need. Right? Nothing outside of myself that I need to find happiness, to find comfort, to find satisfaction. He realized that it's all within, that this is the nature of the self. So this is what the yogis call spiritual knowledge. There's a lot of talk. I think recently in the United States they did a poll. They find that that people who identify as religious is rapidly dropping, but people that identify as spiritual is rapidly increasing. And about like 33% of the people in the United States say, "I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual," which I think can be a very positive trend. But the question is, what exactly do we mean by spiritual? That's left very vague, right? So Bhagavad Gita, the great sages in these sacred texts, they're very clear about it, right? What exactly is spirit? Spirit is that element, that conscious, eternal element, right? That animates the body, that makes the body come alive. Right? And if we understand spirit, if we truly understand spirit, it is the panacea to all of our problems on an individual level as well as on a social level. Right? This is what the yogis teach. Right? All of our problems, all of our social ills even, all of our individual issues that we struggle with, as well as those issues that plague our societies, are based on ignorance. And essentially, it's ignorance of understanding spirit, of understanding the self. And if we could clue in on this and understand this, what are the big problems in the world? There's nationalism that causes violence and pain and wars and suffering, right? There's sexism and misogyny. There's economic problems based on greed and so on. There's racism, divisions based on our birth and so on. All of these problems stem from ignorance. All of these problems stem from us not understanding spirituality, not understanding the self, not understanding who we are. I'll give an example. Maybe this will be the last example we give today. Let's see. How could this spiritual knowledge help solve our problems? Think of something like this. Imagine if we lived in a society where our entire social status was based on the car that we drive, okay? And maybe it's a little bit like that already, but let's say it was entirely like that. Like people looked at you, they looked at your car, and they just kind of put you in a box right there, Certain people that are driving Mercedes and Lexus and so on, they're getting certain advantages and privileges in life. Everybody's looking up to them. Everybody wishes they were them. People that are driving these economy cars, they're seen as lower people. They don't have all the advantages in society. People look down their nose at them. They feel a sense of resentment. Sometimes they're battling against the other ones. There's all this social tension, right? You drive this car, maybe you drive an expensive car, and maybe even feel a sense of internal guilt about it. Why am I one of the privileged ones? What did I do to deserve this? I wish I wasn't. You're driving the economy car saying, why was I stuck in this horrible position? Why don't people treat me fairly? Why do I have to be judged by my car? There's all this tension, so much tension. Everybody with me? Now, keep the same scenario in mind, but let's make one shift in this scenario. Imagine that every day, everybody shifted cars, okay? You're driving a Lexus today, but you know that tomorrow you're going to be driving, what's like a economy kind of?
Suzuki.
Okay, a Suzuki. So you're driving a Lexus today, but you know you're driving a Suzuki tomorrow. You know that you can't really invest yourself in this identity as the Mercedes, because you know that you're just in it very temporarily, and tomorrow you're going to be in a different situation. And when you're looking at someone else that's driving a Suzuki, even though you're driving a Lexus, you're saying, okay, maybe they're driving this, but tomorrow they're going to be driving a Bentley, So we're all shifting. It means we all begin to understand that these external forms that we're inhabiting for just a very short amount of time are constantly changing. And we can't judge one another based on this temporary, insignificant, superficial, external characteristic, right? So the yogis understood our lives like that. Some of us are black, some of us are white, some of us are American, some of us are Indian, some of us are male, some of us are female, some of us are human, some of us are animals, some of us are plants. Yes, and we can talk about this too. And the yogis saw the soul in each one, and they understood. I may be a man now, I may be a woman next, I may be black today, I may be white later, I may be human now, I may be a dog in my next life, I may be a plant in my next life. And I can take it for granted that I've gone through so many forms of life over the course of we don't know how many lifetimes, that I've been up and down in all of these different forms, that I've been a sinner, that I've been a saint, right? And that everybody around me is going through these same changes, right? It's that kind of consciousness we could call spiritual vision. In the Bhagavad Gita, a term is used for that. It's called samadarshana, seeing the sameness, seeing the equality. Darshana means to see, sama means the evenness or sameness, right? Seeing that regardless of a person's body, there's a soul in there that's made of the same spiritual energy that I'm made of, right? That we are both eternal, that we are both sacred, actually, right? That the spark of spiritual energy that is each person is sacred, that should be honored, right? And that when we reach this human form of life, we have the potential to understand this about ourselves, and understand this about every living being, right? And this is the awareness. This is called spirituality, right? When we talk about spirituality, it's not just all about chakras and all about crystals, and not that these things are bad, But this is spiritual knowledge, right? Knowledge, jnana, right? Divya jnana, spiritual knowledge. Or the yogis would say that by contemplating this knowledge, you contemplate it daily, you apply it in your life. And then you begin to see through it. They call that jnana chakshusa, seeing through the eyes of knowledge, right? This is the answer. It's kind of like, there are so many problems that plague our society. And we could dedicate our life to any one of them, right? I could dedicate my life to trying to obliterate racism or sexism or economic inequality and so many things. And that's good work. That's fine. But what the yogis are saying is that there's one root to all of these problems. If you go right to the, even if you solve one problem, another one pops up. But if you go right to the root of all the problems, which is this ignorance of spirituality, you can solve all the problems in one. So there have to be people in society that are speaking to this. Why don't we learn this in school, right? And I'm not saying you have to teach religion in school, but why didn't I learn in school that there's an ancient tradition, right? Show me all the traditions. Let me hear about them. Let me consider them all. But there's an ancient tradition that had this idea, right? That the body is just a temporary vehicle, right? That is, the body always comes and goes, but that there's a conscious spark in it that is us, that's eternal, and that transcends that body. And when the body dies, the soul moves on. Or we could say it the other way, that when the soul moves on, the body dies, right? And that the soul takes on its next body. And that happens due to its karma, due to its actions in this life. It takes that. Why weren't we taught this in school? And what if we were, right? What if this was presented as, here's the way some people see the world. Let's consider it. Let's talk about it. Let's compare different viewpoints. But mostly what we're taught is, if we're going to be happy in life, we're going to need to make some money. And here are the different ways that you can make money. Right? Again, it's all based on the false premise that we're going to find happiness through an external source. And the yogis understood, no, you don't need any external source to find happiness. Let's understand who we are. That's called self-realization, right? Self-realization. What's the goal of life? We've been taught that it's sense gratification. The yogis say not sense gratification, self-realization. That's where we focus. Okay, I think we're out of time. Maybe we have a few minutes. Are there any, maybe just one or two quick questions we could take, if anyone has? Yes.
I have a question. I will try my best to try to formulate it, but from a spiritual point of view, it is, people can admit really easy the soul, the existence of the soul.
Yes.
But from people who doesn't belong to any religion or spirituality, it's really hard to explain the soul. And when we talk about consciousness, people tend to think that it comes from the brain.
Yes.
So how can we explain what is what?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. It's commonly taught that consciousness is a product of the brain. So analogies are always helpful for this kind of thing. Why do we make the assumption? There's no good reason to make the assumption that consciousness develops in the brain. They'll say, well, we can I don't even know exactly what the technology is, but we can see what parts of the brain are working, like they're lighting up when we're thinking in this way, and we can see that another part is lighting up when we're thinking another way. So that indicates that consciousness is generated in these areas. But who says it's generated there, right? Like, for instance, say we had a radio, okay? And we hear this music coming out of the radio, right? So we might think, oh, there's little people inside the radio, and the music is being generated inside the radio, right? But we all know that that's not true. And even if that radio breaks, it's not that the music has ended. There's another place that's generating that radio signal. And this radio is just one location where that signal is represented and spreads from there. So the yogis are saying our consciousness is not situated in the brain, but it's the first material locale, or let's say, you could say the first material locale even the mind, we could say, is beyond that, right? It's still more subtle. But what's the proof? What's the reasoning to say that it's come in the brain? It's just we often see what we want to see. If we want there to be no God, right? If that's our emotional, due to our emotions, we want. Then when we look at the brain, we say, "Oh, the consciousness is generated there." But if we're truly objective, we'll see consciousness is represented there, but we have no proof that it's generated there. But I think I need to stop now because they're about to start the thing. But we'd love to discuss this more. We'll be here again at the same time tomorrow. I'd love to see you all then. Thank you all so much. You've been a wonderful group to discuss these things with. Hari Om Tat Sat.